Hey, everybody, and welcome to this week's You Are Not an Artist podcast. We are going live today on YouTube, which is going to be our weekly YouTube Q&A every Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. So if you guys are listening to the podcast, jump onto the YouTube live on Wednesdays, and that way you guys can ask questions and get some feedback, get some help with your art. Today's topic, or this week's topics, I should say, is going to be around finding inspiration for your artwork. It's a pretty heavy topic. It's a hot topic for all artists, no matter what stage of your career you're in. So we are going to be covering that today. I did want to give you guys a little bit of an update in terms of what we have going on with the three-phase curriculum and all the stuff that we're doing online. I do have a newsletter that's going out. So, hey, Matthew. Yeah, go ahead. Shoot a question, buddy. I'm just getting the podcast set up, doing a quick intro. Please go ahead and ask a question. Definitely answer it here in a second. With the newsletter, I've got a weekly newsletter going out. So I'm going to have a landing page set up that I'm going to put out on my social media. So if you guys aren't already following me on Instagram, you can just follow me on alejandro.fine.art on Instagram or on Twitter, as well at You Are Not an Artist. It's you, the letter U, because somebody already took You Are Not an Artist on Twitter. That Twitter handle already got taken. So it's the letter U, the letter R, not an artist on Twitter. And I'll be posting up the link to the landing page there. So let's kind of jump into things. We're talking about finding inspiration. So Matt, who's in the audience right now, is going to ask a question whenever he's ready, and I'll answer that. But let's talk about finding inspiration. I'm going to kind of give you guys a couple examples because I think finding inspiration as an artist is applicable to all practices. So it doesn't matter whether you're a musician or a sculptor or a photographer or a painter or a digital artist, it doesn't matter. I think finding inspiration sort of impacts all of us in the way that we create. But I've been studying this for the last 10 years because I think it's really fascinating how we all find inspiration and the way we all kind of navigate that. And I think inspiration can come from many places. But I do think we have to be careful with what we use for inspiration. So let's kind of cover like the kind of things that kind of tread in questionable waters in terms of inspiration and where that can lead us. And I have some great examples for you guys. So, and you can look these up after the podcast is over and the Q&A is over. One example I have is from a rapper. You guys might know who he is, Notorious B.I.G., aka Biggie Smalls, Christopher Wallace. So if you guys have heard his music, you probably know who I'm talking about. So I was reading an interesting article one time that said in an interview, I think he was being interviewed on a radio station, was that he never found or searched for inspiration among his peers, meaning he never listened to what was contemporary rap music at the time. And the reason he didn't do it, and I'll tell you where he did find his inspiration, but the reason he didn't go that route for his inspiration was because he didn't want to be influenced by what was already out there. And I totally relate to that. I totally understand, because as artists, we want to be unique. We want our voices to be unique. And sometimes what can happen is if we look for inspiration in art that's already being created in our own niche or our own medium, like for instance, 90s New York rap. Biggie didn't listen to 90s New York rap, at least not for inspiration. He might have listened to it to know what the next song was coming out, but for specific inspiration, he was not listening to that. He was listening to, and this is a quote, "I only listen to country music when I'm going to sleep." He also listened to reggae music. And if you listen to some of his lyrics and the way his rhythmic patterns were, you can kind of find some similarities there across those other inspirations. So like we said, finding inspiration in your own niche can lead to you creating works that are very derivative. So meaning that your works are very similar and inspired by what's already out there, what's already within your lane. And we see that a lot in current music, especially pop music, where we turn on a station and we can't recognize which artist, unless that particular song was just highly publicized by a particular artist. But other than that, sometimes we listen to music and we can't tell who we're listening to because it sounds so similar. And that's what happens whenever we find inspiration in artists or artwork that's within our own lane or own niche. Another example of an artist that all of you may know that was looking for inspiration. Oh my God, I forgot to start the recording of the podcast. I screwed that up real good. Okay, well, if if you guys are just joining the podcast, we're talking about inspiration. Anyway, um, so another example of inspiration is from Van Gogh. You guys know who the artist Van Gogh is, a very famous Dutch artist. He found inspiration. I think if you read up a lot of his story and you read the letters to his brother, he started to find a lot of inspiration in contemporary impressionists. But when you look at his early works, they're very derivative. They're very much like the impressionists of his time. And he separated himself by doing one particular thing, which was he started to find inspiration in Japanese prints during that era. And I would say some of that time period that predated the impressionist painters in Europe, and specifically in France. In France, they were just all about Japanese art prints. And whenever, Japan started trading with the rest of the world, a lot of artwork got distributed different parts. And one of those areas was in France during the beginning of the Impressionist period. And so Van Gogh got a hold of some of these Japanese art prints, and he was just in love with them. He was a collector. And in fact, his brother Theo was selling some of these Japanese art prints. If you research some of Van Gogh's artwork, you'll see that he actually did some studies of Japanese artwork. If you look at his cherry blossoms, that's an example of using Japanese art as inspiration. So Van Gogh was directly influenced by a different artwork outside of his collective, outside of his community. And that's what led to him interpreting through that influence and through that inspiration to what we see in his artwork today. And I find that fascinating. I'll give you one more example. David Grohl, who was in the band Nirvana, and he was said in an interview that with Pharrell from the Neptunes, and he said that he got a lot of his inspiration from funk bands in the 70s. In fact, he stole like one of the I don't know how you call it. I'm not a musician. One of the ways that he was playing the drum through that particular song was actually taken from one of his favorite, I think it was the Ohio Players, if I'm not mistaken. It's online. But you can see that it's okay for you to go from one medium or one particular area in art, or maybe outside of your own medium of art, maybe music or movies or photography, and use that as an inspiration for how you apply that to your own artwork. We just have to be careful that, for instance, if you're a portrait artist that uses a lot of pop art and does cubism in mostly warm colors, and you're like doing punk rock music, and that's your inspiration. If you only look for artwork that's that same kind of artwork, you're not going to grow. It's not going to look any different than anybody else that's in the exact same niche. It's all going to be the same. And if you're really building a career, that is one of the main tenets of growing your artist career, is looking for inspiration that's going to push you in another direction so that people see you and recognize you for that specific thing. And sometimes it has to do with theme, sometimes it doesn't. It really is a wild card in terms of you figuring out where you're going to find inspiration. My last example was going to be where I find a lot of my inspiration, and I really hone in on it. I really lean in hard on some of the things I grew up with, for everything from Western movies to breakdancing to 90s hip hop to kung fu movies of the 1970s and 80s. Like, I really lean hard on those things and I look for inspiration in that because those are the things that excite me. So let's start leaning in more into the positive stuff. When it comes to finding a lot of positivity in your artwork, it's very important that you, what we decided to call this was follow the dopamine. It's really important that you follow the dopamine. And the dopamine is a chemical that happens in your brain whenever you're doing an activity that really excites you, that really gets your interest and gets your focus. It's what usually happens whenever we're doing something and we get into this sort of flow state and we lose track of time. That's what's happening whenever whenever you're experiencing that. And we have to follow more of that. It's really important that we do that in our daily lives, but it's even more important that we do that whenever we're creating. Here's the opposite effect. Whenever you are frustrated with a particular piece, or you can't figure out what you need to paint next, and you start thinking about what everybody else wants, you'll find yourself painting something that you don't want to paint. And it is what was the word again?
Following the cortisol.
Cortisol. My wife is right next to me. She's helping me out through the podcast. She knows she's going to be a biochemist, so she understands all these terminologies. But so the cortisol is the opposite of the dopamine, and that is what you're feeling whenever you're kind of feeling stressed or anxious or a lack of interest. It is what's happening to you physically that you can feel. It's a physical manifestation of that particular chemical that's happening to you whenever you're not involved in what you're doing. And that can lead to, a lot of different things. It can lead to you not being interested anymore in what you're doing. And sometimes what I think happens to artists early on when they're supposed to be focusing on building your creative process and getting inspired, what you really have to be focusing on is all those things. What inspires you? What's your creative process? What lights you up? What gets that dopamine going? But whenever you go too early in your career and start focusing on selling and figuring out how to market your artwork before you've done any of the preliminary stuff that I just said, what happens is you end up painting stuff that you think is marketable, and then you become a manufacturer, and that can really drain you. And it's not going to take very long before you're just going to like hang up your brushes and your aprons and all your supplies and just be like, forget it, I don't want to do this anymore. It can also happen whenever you are experiencing sort of like an artist block, and you're not looking at the things that seriously interest you because you're overthinking them. You're thinking nobody's going to be into this stuff. I can tell you right now, living the world we live in 2021, there is more weird stuff that has a large community for it than you would think. In fact, we were just watching a TikTok yesterday where this guy has almost 1 million followers, and he is obsessed with trains. He just loves trains, and he just quit his job just so that he can focus on obsessing over trains. He literally goes and waits at the train station, and the train comes in and he gets excited, he films it. That's pretty much the end of the video. And there are literally 1 million people that are like obsessed with him. So if you think that maybe people are not going to be into what you're into, with the way the world works now, there's just so much communication happening and community building in these little small interest areas that, relative to the population of the world, 1 million people is actually pretty small. And if you think about it from that perspective, and everybody that's on the internet now looking for their communities, they're just looking for somebody that's into the weird stuff they're into. And that's a good thing. That's a great thing, because you can literally build on top of that and never have to look for, things that don't inspire you or don't excite you or don't interest you. You never have to go down that road if you don't want to. So when you're thinking about inspiration, follow the dopamine. Follow what interests you. What's your passion? What's the thing that lights you up? And, that isn't to be confused with things that we would consider like things that you got to wipe your ass. Like that kind of stuff where you just have to do it. Like you don't have a choice. You just have to wipe your ass and maybe do some administrative stuff. Don't get it confused with that, because we all got to do it. We all have to do that stuff. So don't get it confused with that kind of stuff. That stuff is necessary in order for you to operate your business. But when it comes to inspiration early on in your career, make sure that you're focusing on things that truly inspire you. That way, as you get into other parts of your career in your phase 2 and your phase 3, you can really use that as a reminder. And you can just be like, oh, I'm facing a little bit of an artist block. I know what I need to do. I need to hone in on the things that interest me. I need to hone in on the creative process that excites me. If you like painting on the floor, paint on the floor. If you like having your favorite movie on while you're painting, throw that on. There's no wrong way for you to chase this dopamine as long as you're not hurting yourself or somebody else, obviously. So stick to that and you're early on in phase 1. If you guys want to learn more about what phase you're in, I'm going to link the website or my website below that's got the 3 phases and explains those, as well as here on YouTube, there are different videos that explain the different phases. So phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Phase 1 is just the first part of your career where you're just learning, practicing, building inventory, building community, not selling anything. You are not selling in phase 1 of your career. You're only doing those main things. The second phase is really where you start to kind of figure out all the stuff that you need to do in the business, like setting up, launching, your website, figuring out a marketing strategy, doing your taxes, finding a legal entity, filing a legal entity, having a sales process, like basically building out a business plan. And phase 2 can be really, really long, but it's important that you do all the work in phase 1 so that when you run into like these little artist blocks where you're struggling to be inspired, that you've already laid the foundation for that. And you don't have any rocky little moments where you have dips in your art career where maybe you're not doing anything and things have just dried up, So it's very important that you focus on those things early on so that as you get into other parts of your career, you can have a good handle on them. And of course, phase 3 is where we all want to be. Phase 3 is where we have a team of people around us, maybe not a big team, but a team around us that's helping us manage things, answer people's requests, book commissions, or, scheduling you for an event or sending out your social media. Those things can all be outsourced so that in phase 3, we get back to the thing we like to do most of the time, which is creating artwork. So that's kind of a nutshell, but I explain those in other videos on YouTube, as well as blogs and articles that you can find on the website. So that is what I wanted to talk about today, is how to get inspired and how to figure that process out. Just a disclaimer, this is just what I've learned. There's probably a lot of other topics out there about finding inspiration, but I find it very useful whenever you can find somebody else's perspective on the way that the way that you're trying to figure out and doing something. So follow us here on YouTube if you found some value here. Again, doing this every Wednesday at 7:30 Central Standard Time, 7:30 p.m. Also follow us on Twitter. I'll put all the links below for Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. If you guys follow me there, I'm not as active on Facebook just because, nobody likes Facebook anymore. I'm trying to get off of Instagram too, if I can. But I'm going to put all those links below so that you guys can hit us up and ask questions. Of course, the website. And tune in next week. And we're going to be covering a different topic next week. And excited to answer you guys' questions. If you're watching the recording, you can always comment on the video and I'll get back to you. I've got an alert on my phone that lets me know when everybody comments on the YouTube channel. And have a great rest of the week. Ooh, that's a tough one. West
of the week.
West of the Reek. West of the Reek.
Oh, that's
yeah.
I always
West
try to
of
do
the Reek. West of the Reek. Have a good West of the Reek, guys. We'll see you next time.